Hello, friends.
Hey, mamas.
Welcome to My Invisible Disease podcast. We are here to share our struggles and hacks as two moms living with chronic illness.
Tune in and join our community as we share stories and experiences while we sort through the ups and downs of living with invisible disease.
Hey, Cassie.
Hey, girl. How are ya?
Good. I am super excited for this episode. We have a filmmaker on today.
I feel like this is the most popular we've ever been. When she reached out to us about featuring her documentary, I was like, okay, wait, what is a FMT? And I'm a little immature. So I was like, okay, wait, you take someone else's poop and you put it in your own butt? What? Anyways, I got past
it's all designer shit.
Yes.
And then you have to think, like, what does designer shit mean? I don't know. What a curiosity.
Yeah. So when we got to sit down with Saffron and hear about her struggles and how she used her background as a filmmaker to feature this like totally crazy treatment that sounds outrageous, but once we learned a little bit more about it, I think it was pretty enlightening.
And it really just shows, the direction of sort of some of these out of the box treatments I think people that are living with chronic illness, when you feel desperate, you're looking, maybe something that's out of that Western medicine conventional treatment because you're willing to do anything, even take someone else's poo and put it in your own bum.
Okay, here I thought we got past the poop jokes, but we haven't.
Yeah.
Anyways, I think that people are going to love this. And I hope that after this episode, they feel like they want to watch her documentary because the clips that we saw, and we will put that in the show notes, but she did such a good job and it's so entertaining and awesome.
It really captures so many, especially women, like their journey living with chronic illness and her own experience with that. And absolutely, this documentary is going to be released. It's something that you can watch. Like I watched it all the way through and it was not only fascinating, definitely an alternative, but, just a love story.
Yeah, it's all good. Enjoy the episode, everybody.
My name is Saffron and I am a filmmaker and I'm also an IBD patient. I suffer from ulcerative colitis. I was diagnosed in my early 20s and I'm now in my mid-30s, so it's been a while. When I was first diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, my condition was considered mild and I was put on a drug called 5-ASA medication that actually worked really well for me in the beginning. It got me into remission. It had very little side effects. Like I was very happy to be on that drug because it was working well for me.
What kind of symptoms were you experiencing at the time that pushed you to even get diagnosed for colitis?
The symptoms that I noticed first were a bit of blood in my stool, which I thought at first might be a hemorrhoid. I was kind of hoping it was a hemorrhoid. And then the second thing I was hoping was, I hope it's just a stomach bug that I can take antibiotics for and it will go away. Actually, I had a couple of stomach bugs for which I was prescribed antibiotics and then it kept coming back. So I think I was suffering from colitis the whole time and I was treating with antibiotics, which now I know can make colitis worse. So I finally got in for a colonoscopy and that first colonoscopy was like clear as day. I woke up from that colonoscopy and they're like, yep, you have colitis. I'm like, are you sure? Are we going to wait for results? They're like, no, it's colitis. We can see it. It's exactly what it is. I don't think I had heard of colitis before. And I think the most shocking thing was hearing that it was chronic, that I was going to have this for the rest of my life. I was prescribed these medications and I was like, okay, so how long do I take these for? And they're like, oh, no, you take these forever. You're on drugs forever now. Like, this is just your life.
It's weird how all of a sudden it just like switches, right? Like you're like, okay, yeah, I'll, pop this for a bit and then I'll be on the up and up and back on my feet. But nope, sorry. This is something you have to deal with forever.
Totally. And I think at 21, I was like really naive where I was like, oh, that's what happens to most people.
Yeah.
Most people have it forever. But mine, I think I'm going to be good in a few months. And no, I followed the typical path.
I'm still in that stage of, I wouldn't say denial in any way, shape, or form, but for my health issues, I'm like, I'm not the typical path. I will overcome. I'm still journeying in that direction, but I very much understand how, you know, following the typical path or progression, you know, it can feel really like not me. Like it's easy to kind of see yourself in a different point of view on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it changes your like identity that you have of yourself. But I think up until that point, I was like, I'm a healthy young person. I'm not a person with chronic illness. How did I eat healthy? Like, you know, all the risk factors. And I'm like, this doesn't fit the description of me. I've never had health problems in my life. It was really hard to kind of, feel that, like, come to terms with that new identity that had been placed on myself.
Totally. So you got diagnosed with, brain fart.
Colitis.
That's the word.
Colitis. The ulcerative part is like the tricky part to say.
And then what happened?
Yeah, so I was placed on these medications that worked well. At the beginning, it was like I would take the medication and feel good and then wean off. And then my symptoms would come back. So I'd take the medication again and wean off. And I was always in this phase of trying to get off my meds. Because again, I just didn't want to believe that I needed medication for the rest of my life. So I kept...
Yeah. So was the protocol that you were okay to wean off when you started to feel better, or that was just solely something you were doing on your own?
My doctor at the time kind of supported it. He was like, yeah, sure, let's see. Let's try. Let's, you know, if you're feeling well, let's take one less pill a day. And, you know, so it was kind of, we were in that experimental phase. But I think, you know, over the course of a few years, it was like, no, you definitely need to be on the max dose of this medication. And then it came time where the max dose of that medication wasn't doing what it used to do. I was having a lot of symptoms and having a really hard time getting it under control. So,
did your medication, did your medication come with side effects?
At the time, the medication was described to me as being extremely safe with like no side effects. If you were to get pregnant, you could stay on this medication. Like that's how safe it is. I did have one instance where I passed a kidney stone when I was like 24. And again, like that's just a weird thing. I'm like, why is a healthy 24-year-old woman passing a kidney stone? And then I realized that this medication that I'd been on is actually one of the side effects is that it can have effects on your kidneys. So it is relatively safe. But of course, if you're on like a full dose of a medication for a very long period of time, everything kind of has a side effect, right?
Totally. I find that people are always the most curious about like what your symptoms you're experiencing was. Like, what was the day looking like for you as somebody who was living with colitis?
By the end, like after 10 years of having colitis, when I was at my very worst, it was brutal. Like, I was lucky if I had a couple days in a row, like a couple good days in a row. Generally, every day was a bad day, or part of that day was a bad day, where my symptoms were lots of blood and mucus, which is like really scary to see. Really bad pain. You know, and I've had one baby now, I'm pregnant with my second. I would compare my colitis pain to like mid-labor pains.
Wow.
Like on the bathroom floor sobbing. And I think the worst part was the psychological effects it was having on me. I believe I was suffering from like some form of PTSD. Like, I don't want to self-diagnose myself or be dramatic, but I had had so many close calls where like I almost didn't make it to a bathroom in time. And that is so humiliating and terrifying that it became really difficult for me to be in social situations or even in a traffic jam or traveling by air when they put that seatbelt fasten sign on the plane, where I'm like, this is the moment that I'm going to have to go to the bathroom and I'm going to poop my pants on a plane full of people and I'm never going to recover mentally from that. So it was just every day was full of these triggers of shame and humiliation. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I would find
sometimes it's just easier not to leave your house. And that's why a lot of people isolate.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Yeah, everything that should have been a fun outing was like, I hope that this gets canceled. I hope that I have an excuse to get out of this. And at the time, I was like 30 when I was at my worst, and I was thinking about my future and wanting to have children. And I was like, how can I be a mom when, like, you know, I can't leave my house some days?
Yeah, even going to the playground and there not being a washroom, right? Like, it's very, I can imagine just that anxious feeling that would just, that mental load that went with everything you did. So when you're talking about how, you know, having so many bad days, how did that, from the time of being diagnosed in your early 20s to your 30s, how did that affect your career choices? How did that affect, you know, your path in life, living with that chronic illness?
I mean, I work in film. I started out as an actor and I didn't like being an actor. I am naturally introverted, so I got more into like film editing. So at that period in my life, I really liked film editing, and I still do. I don't know if that's because I'm introverted, but also there is an aspect of it. I like being alone in my office. Like, that's a very safe, calm place for me. Being on set was always, I mean, when I make documentaries, I have to be on set before I can go home and edit that footage. The set part was really stressful, traveling to shoots. I was really lucky that, like, the people, I always work with a really small crew, and the crew is people who know me and know my conditions. So when I say today's a bad day, I'm not feeling well, I remember my camera guy would say, I will drive on the shoulder of this highway to get you to a bathroom as soon as possible. Like, I got you, don't worry. So I didn't have to be as ashamed or embarrassed. Like, I knew that he had my back and he wasn't going to judge me if I was just honest of, like, you know what, today's a bad day. You got to cover for me while I run to the bathroom, you know?
Yeah. That's awesome. It's always nice to have that, like, ally that you don't need to explain yourself every time you're like, uh-oh. So, like, they're like, it's okay, go, 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 go.
Yeah, and people understand it. Like, poop's poop. We all do it, right? So,
yeah.
With your practitioner that you were working with through your diagnosis, was there other support offered, you know, through the medical system for you, as far as, or was it just you went in to see your specialist, you had your appointments, you monitored your medication and left? Like, what kind of care were you receiving during this time?
Yeah, I was assigned a gastroenterologist, and that was it. And the gastroenterologist's approach was very by the books. It was, let's try this medication, let's see what your symptoms are. I think once every year or two, we'll do a colonoscopy as necessary to see that there's no cancer. But yeah, it was kind of like on an as-needed basis. Oh, you're not feeling well? Take more drugs. You're feeling better? You could take a little bit less drugs. That was kind of the gist of it.
Okay, so you went through tons of different treatments and stuff. Obviously, you found one that was a little risque. Tell me how you got to the point of, what is the acronym for it? FMT. How did you get there? Tell us everything.
So when I was first diagnosed, a family friend sent me this article that was in the Toronto Star. And it was this guy who was my age who had really severe Crohn's disease. And he had treated himself using this new thing, fecal transplant. And his mom was his stool donor. So they had taken his mom's stool, put it in a blender, turned it into a slurry, and he had put it up his butt. And it had, quote unquote, cured his Crohn's disease.
Yeah.
So it was this sensational story that I was like, that's gross, first of all, but super interesting. I don't know if I fully buy it, but it always just kind of lived in the back of my head. And my mom at the time was like, let's do it. And I was like, no. Like, I'm not there yet. It was.
I remember these headlines like years ago. Yeah. Like when it was just something that was brand new, introduced to, you know, the general public as a sensational like type story, because it was so out there. And, you know, to someone that's not suffering kind of seems a little bit crazy.
I'm a grown-ass woman, and I still, like, can't stop laughing to myself because we're talking about poop. Like, it's just such, like, an uncomfortable and weird thing to talk about. But you're like, I completely, like, understand how that could work. So Yeah, tell us some more.
Yeah, I mean, it is just, first of all, it sounds made up, or it sounds snake oily, or like...
Or who tried it first? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and like I said, I mean, I was just diagnosed at that point, so I was still dealing with like the denial of even having this illness. I'm like, I feel gross enough admitting that I have colitis. I'm not going to take it a step further and start looking into something like this. But what happened was I just got worse and worse as the years went on. Standard medications weren't working as well. Then I randomly met somebody, actually, a friend of a friend, and it came up that I had colitis. And he said, oh, I used to have Crohn's, but I treated it with fecal transplant using my mom as a donor. And I was like, did you have an article in the Toronto Star 10 years ago? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, that was you. So I met him in the flesh, and I was like, okay, tell me everything. And he did, and it was like, his story was just so amazing. And this was 10 years later, and he had not had any symptoms, had not been on any medication for like 10 years.
It's so crazy that the universe just brought you guys together.
Yeah, right.
Right? And it's not something that he would ever talk about. He's like, oh my gosh, like, I can't believe like that article was posted. I was so embarrassed at the time. So like, it's not something he publicly advertised. It just kind of came up organically in conversation. I'm like, weird connection.
Well, and it's one of those things too. I think you're a little bit more open when you are suffering so badly that, you know, that there has to be another way, or, you know, that there might be another solution out there. It's almost like going and overturning every rock to see if you can find it. So, you know, just being a little bit more open, especially talking to him face to face. That is crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it, you know, it was kind of an emotional experience hearing his story because, like I said, I was feeling so desperate at that time. And his story gave me such hope. Mm-hmm. And I'm a bit of a skeptic in the sense that I was like, well, is that normal? Like, I know it worked well for you, but does it really work that well for everybody? Are you an anomaly? Like, I kind of knew, I felt, I don't know if this is going to work for me as well as it worked for him, but I'm desperate for anything at this point. And to have this person kind of hold my hand and guide me through it was so comforting and kind of gave me the confidence to be like, yeah, like,
will you be my donor?
Yeah.
I was laughing at that part of the documentary. I actually really loved how you guys kind of spun with like the humor side of it because poop is funny.
Yeah. So then actually speaking to that, so you met your partner along the way and he's part of this process. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, we had been dating for maybe 4 years at this point. I had talked about fecal transplant before. I was like, oh, there's this thing that because he knew my illness. He had seen my symptoms, you know. We were living together at the time. We were sharing a bathroom. He knew how this disease was affecting my everyday life. Then when I kind of started playing around with the idea of maybe I should try fecal transplant, it became evident that he would be the best donor, partly because we live together. So it just becomes easier to collect his samples. But also because when you're looking for a stool donor, you're looking for basically the healthiest person you know, and he happens to be the healthiest person I know. Mm-hmm. He has no history of any kind of illness, mental or bowel related, because the bowels and the brain are
all tied together.
Yeah. Very little antibiotic use his entire life. Breastfed, vaginally delivered. Like, these are things we're starting to learn affect the microbiome as well. Like, it was just this crazy checklist, and he actually matched every single one. Wow. And I think that, yeah, he was honored when I asked him, actually, because he really felt like, yeah, I could be a good stool donor. And if I can help, especially my partner who I love, why wouldn't I? Got to put this good poop to good use, you know? So we jumped at the opportunity.
So obviously you're a filmmaker, but where did the inspiration come from to actually create a documentary from your experience? If you want to kind of touch on how that idea came to fruition.
So at the time, I just became so obsessed with this topic that I was researching it for my own interest, all day, every day. Whenever I was trying to work on something else, I kept, like, this was my procrastination thing. I would go back to the fecal transplant research, and I wanted an excuse to reach out to some of the top researchers in the world and be like, hey, can we schedule an interview where I can just talk to you for 2 hours about the research that you're doing around this? So that was my like motivating factor. And I just thought, I can't be the only person who wants to know more about this. And then came the decision to include my part of the journey in the film. I felt that the film needed a kind of character-driven story arc. I was an obvious candidate because it just would be easier for me to film my own journey than to follow a subject. And I think at the time I had a lot of angst, and I was really desperate that there was a bit of fear of what will people think of me. But the stronger desire was telling my story.
Well, and it's so, people that are suffering from similar situations, like, it's not that you wish it upon anyone else, but it is such a relief to be able to see your experience shared with someone else. And I think it's just that much more powerful. And, you know, really through your journey, which we've seen through the documentary, the obstacles that you've faced and, you know, the successes that you've had, it really does inspire hope, and people can see themselves in that same footprint rather than just speaking to the subject. I think it really does carry so much more weight. And obviously you got to share, you know, how you were affected by this treatment. So
for people that are watching or listening, I guess they'll be watching once we share the link with your new documentary to them. But if they're listening to this podcast, they've received a recent diagnosis, what is your message for them? Like, what do you want to tell that person listening who's kind of going through those early steps of accepting this diagnosis and the road ahead?
I think it's important to surround yourself with people who are supportive. Like I said, that my cameraman friend who, you know, in a work situation had my back, my partner who was never grossed out or turned off by me talking about this because he genuinely just cared that I was feeling okay. Having those people in your corner helps to eliminate some of the shame and embarrassment around it. Because you have to deal with the physical symptoms, but the mental symptoms as well. I mean, those have to be dealt with, and it's just as important.
Totally.
So are you open to sharing your results of your fecal transplant on this podcast?
Yeah, definitely. So I want to say that in the film, I always say the film is not like a DIY fecal transplant instruction guide. I'm not telling anybody to go out there and do what I did. What I do want to say is that this is a really promising area of research. It is legitimate. It is being proven to be a cure for C. difficile, which is a sometimes deadly gut infection. Yeah. And there are over 400 clinical trials right now testing fecal transplant for a ton of diseases, from Crohn's colitis to autism, obesity, depression. It's crazy the amount of things that might be connected to the gut microbiome. So I think we're going to uncover a lot of really interesting things about our health. That being said, right now, it is still in the research phase. So you're not able to access it as an individual person. Your best bet is to join a clinical trial. So if you're lucky enough to live near a clinical trial, you should absolutely go for that if it's something you're interested in. But I do just want people to know that, like, it sounds weird and it sounds crazy, but it's legit. There's something to it. We just have to be a bit more patient until we understand exactly how it works. For me, it did work. But I'm not going to say that it will work for everybody. For me, it was a combination of, I did about 200 fecal transplants over the course of 2 years. So it's not a magic bullet cure that you're going to do one fecal transplant and be cured.
How long do you leave the poop in there for?
Everything is still being researched, so we don't know the ideal amount of time. I did about an hour.
Yeah.
So I'd put it in and I would try to lie down for like an hour. And what's weird is that after an hour, like, it goes in as a slurry, but after an hour, it doesn't really come out.
Really?
Yeah, it would kind of stay in all day after that. Like, it would kind of turn into just stool that is in your colon. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, it's absorbing things, so I get it. But
Yeah, it just comes out the next day like
Yeah.
it would look when you normally go to the bathroom. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and honestly, your experience too, having a partner that you lived with, like 200 treatments, that's a lot. Like to take all the steps in the process, and then even once that's all finished, this sample is collected, it's processed, you taking at least an hour on your own to sit through that process. I mean, that could be a huge commitment to someone else that is looking to do it. But it is really interesting to see where you were to start with and then where you are now, as you mentioned, pregnant with your second child, symptom-free, which is so fantastic. And, you know, just that can inspire so much hope. And of course, I understand as the non-medical professional, you definitely don't want to be like saying, okay, go ahead and do this. What's the likeliness that you would do it again, though?
I would do it again.
Yeah.
I mean, disgusting, but I would do it again. For me, I think that, like I said, I did 200 fecal transplants and I saw a lot of improvement, but it didn't get me to full remission. Then I got pregnant during COVID. I think I had a good reaction to pregnancy, which some people with autoimmune conditions, their immune system lowers. And I had a good reaction to COVID, to tell the truth. Like the lockdowns were really good for me mentally because, like I said, I wasn't exposing myself to these trigger situations. So I think it was this combination of a ton of fecal transplants that were working slowly over time with pregnancy, with COVID. These are things that you can't recreate in a clinical trial, but it did work for me. So if my colitis symptoms come back, I've been in remission for 3.5 years, which is just, I can't even believe it. Like I said, I never went a week without symptoms for years and years. So to not have had a single symptom for 3.5 years is just like, I look back at this film and it's hard to see myself and what I was going through. But that means
follow like a diet regime that you find helps you. Like, are you gluten-free or what are you doing with that?
So when I was really sick, I did specific carbohydrate diet, which is like grain-free, sugar-free, and very little dairy. It was a very restrictive diet, and I was on that for about 5 years. And it was helpful. But now that I don't have symptoms, I try to just focus on eating all the food groups, and I try to get as much fiber as possible. But truthfully, I don't always eat the healthiest. I could eat whatever I want and not have symptoms. And like that was miraculous to me. Like I can't believe I can just eat pizza and pasta after depriving myself for so long.
Totally. It's like being born again, right? Like getting to eat all of the foods you used to crave and
not be that person who like, actually, could I like make a change to this item on the menu? Like that was me for years and years. It was really hard.
Well, and I just think too, like as a mama with 2 kids, just some of that fear of moving into parenthood that you had while you were symptomatic. And I think so many women with chronic illness struggle with the idea of like maybe wanting to start a family, but you know, they might have some limitations that will make that just that much harder. And then on the other side of it, getting to be the parent that you want to be without having to deal with those limitations. I think that's really, I mean, just miraculous. Like it really is just, and to see how the human body can heal. And, you know, obviously you're at 3.5 years and, you know, cross our fingers that just continues. But you're, like you said, there are no full studies. We don't know everything about it, but I think even just for the time that you've had, like totally worth it.
Absolutely.
Totally worth it. Yeah.
And I will say that I've had a few like moms reach out to me who are like, you know, it was really hard my first pregnancy. It was really hard postpartum to deal with colitis and that very difficult stage. So I'm considering doing fecal transplant before trying for a second because I just can't put myself through that stress again. And I'm really sympathetic to people. Like I said, I mean, I'm not a doctor. I can't recommend DIY fecal transplant, but certainly a doctor would tell that woman, you're crazy. Absolutely do not do DIY fecal transplant. Whereas I would be like, what is the risk to benefit ratio right now? Mm-hmm. If you're really suffering and you have a specific goal in mind and a timeline in mind, You know, I do think that fecal transplant is going to be more widely available, but we're talking like 10 years from now.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have that time to wait?
Yeah. Well, and I think also, you know, even with this documentary, normalizing the vulnerability of these illnesses that people are dealing with, and that, you know, losing the stigma of the shame that you may feel going along with it. With invisible disease, often people keep it behind closed doors as much as they can. And, you know, even those close to them don't always see the suffering. And I think it was really brave of you just to share your personal story and just put it out there for the world to see.
Saffron, I'm actually like so excited for you, because I think as your story gets out there and people start seeing the documentary, I'm sure you've already had like an outpouring of support, like as you've been promoting this and whatnot and getting your story more and more out there. But like for us, you have no idea how warm and fuzzy we feel when people message us and they're like, I listened to this episode and it made me feel so special. I felt heard. I felt understood. And like you're opening this door for people that have been suffering in silence for so long. I'm excited for you to get to feel some of our warm fuzzies.
Aw, that's beautiful. Yeah, I mean, we'll see. The film's just coming out now. We'll see what kind of reaction. I'm sure I'm going to get some people who are like, you're weird, that you should be embarrassed. But, you know, we have to like tune out those voices, because you're right.
Haters gonna hate. Haters. Poop wherever you want. But like, it might work for you.
Yeah, exactly.
So we have a little segment. I don't know if you've ever heard of the game Marry, Fuck, Kill.
Yes.
We have our own kind of a little bit more PG version, which is Marry, Cheat, Screw. And this, I think this relates to, as someone that has been mindful of their body and also lived with chronic illness, you know, marry is those self-care practices for yourself of something that has just been tried and true for you, even with the mental side of things, like what you might do for yourself. And it's just kind of that guarantee. Cheat is somewhat of an indulgence, your go-to, something that might be a fad that you've really enjoyed over the years. And then screw is something that you've been told 100 times and, you know, just like kick it out the back door, you're over it. So I'm not sure if you had a chance to think of any, but if you want to share what yours would be for your marry, cheat, and screw.
Are these all like in regards to
lifestyle, products, practices?
What helped get you through?
Okay, let me think. Marry, I think, is
now we're awkwardly staring at you saying, what could it possibly be?
Well, so marry would be like the most important thing, right?
Yeah.
To me, it does have to do with the mental side of it, the emotional side of it, of finding those ways to make yourself feel safe and supported by your doctor, by your close circle. And like I said, I mean, for me, COVID was a healing time. I didn't expect that. I didn't realize how badly I really just needed to say goodbye to the rest of the world and just have some time to myself. Yeah. So in hindsight, I do think that is probably the most important thing that a lot of people with chronic illnesses aren't giving to themselves or aren't treating as important. Cheat is an indulgence.
Yeah.
I mean, I would cheat on my diet sometimes, and I always had this guilt afterwards. Like I said, I was on this strict diet for so long. It's just those moments where I could just like try to be a normal person and eat what I wanted. I think that that's really important. You can't be that hard on yourself all the time.
Yeah, totally. Even if your body kicks your ass after, it's still, sometimes it's still worth it just to satisfy, to feel normal, for sure.
Yeah.
Ask every single lactose person about their last ice cream, and they'll tell you they made the decision. They chose to have
typically, the cheat typically is some sort of food for everyone we've talked to, and most people that we've talked to at some point for chronic illness, for inflammation, whatever reason, have been on restricted diets at some point. So this is a very familiar, a very common feeling that is out there. Yeah,
totally. It's a form of self-care.
Yeah.
And screw, what have you tried? What do you hate? What is never coming back again?
Screw, like as a behavior, I would say being too agreeable with your doctor when they're not meeting you halfway. I would walk into doctor's appointments with questions and then be like, no, for sure, you're right. I mean, screw that behavior. I'm never doing that again. When something is wrong, I want to be upfront and frank with my doctor and, you know, demand some answers, not be rushed out of that doctor's office feeling like I wasn't heard.
Yeah, we have to be our own advocates in the healthcare system for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. So, Saffron, for those that are listening and that are looking for ways to find you, if you don't mind sharing with the audience how they can get more information on your documentary, where they can find you online.
Sure. Our website is designershitdocumentary.com. And
love it.
I love it. And we're on social media as Designer Shit as well. We are going to be releasing this film November 14th, and you can find all the information on that on our website.
Awesome. And we will have that in the show notes for any listeners that are interested in finding out a little bit more information on the documentary Designer Shit. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us on today's podcast, Saffron. I think your story will definitely inspire others. And I know that there's people listening that are, you know, going through a lot of the same experience that you had early on. And I'm really excited also that they get to see that you're on the other side. So
I can't believe we just talked about poop for half an hour.
I mean, when don't we, Cassie?
Yeah. Thanks, Saffron. It was awesome meeting you.
Thank you guys so much.
Hey, girl. We see you. And we want you to join our community where we can connect and continue the conversation.
Follow us on Facebook and Instagram at My Invisible Disease Podcast, because no one should go through this alone.
Thank you for listening, and for links, resources, or show notes, you can check us out at myinvisibledisease.com.